American beer history, past and future. This is a look at Anchor Brewing. This is RGR Crafts, and I'm talking with Scott Ungermann, the Brewmaster at Anchor Brewing in San Francisco. Scott, welcome. Thanks for joining me. I appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, no problem. It's great to be here.
Now, I know that Anchor, as a brewery, has a very, very long history, but it is one of the oldest in the country, and it is the oldest in California, isn't it?
Oldest brewery in San Francisco or in California, but we are certainly the oldest brewery on the West Coast.
And that's really, I think, where it all begins. Now, 1896 is the recorded date of the start of the brewery?
Yep, that is correct.
That is quite a track record.
1896 is when we became the Anchor Brewing Company. Actually, trace our roots a little further back into the 1870s, but in 1896 they changed the name of the brewery to Anchor Brewing Company, and that's where we trace our roots here in San Francisco.
And that's quite a history. But when we look at it, really, I think the turning point, and I've seen this referred to, but I'm not sure if I'm correct here. The era that they call the Maytag area. Can you tell me, is that really where the brew really picked up, quote unquote, its steam?
Yeah, exactly. What happened, just to give kind of a brief history of the earlier years of San Francisco brewing, the breweries that opened up out here really during Gold Rush era in the 1850s and beyond began making a style of beer called steam beer, which was all the rage on the West Coast back then. German brewers coming in with German yeast and German brewing techniques, but finding a very different environment and technically a difficult environment to brew in without ice or any other cooling method. They cooled open cool ships. They cooled the wort on the roofs, and steam would come off the roofs, and so it got a nickname of steam beer. And what happened is with our little brewery, we kind of chugged along until Prohibition, and after Prohibition, we were really the only steam beer brewery that came back open in the 30s in San Francisco. And through the 30s, 40s, and 50s, really, the style of beer fell out of favor, and smaller breweries were struggling quite a bit. It was exactly the opposite of the brewing scene we see today, where big breweries are actually suffering losses and small breweries are open up left and right. In those eras, big breweries were getting bigger and small breweries were closing their doors. And Anchor Brewing actually closed their doors very shortly in 1959 and then reopened in the early 60s. And then what you refer to as the Maytag era, Fritz Maytag happened upon the Anchor Brewery in 1965 when it was once again about to close its doors, about to go out of business. And really the last steam beer brewery on the West Coast, or anywhere in the world for that matter, was Anchor Brewing, making steam beer out here on the West Coast. And Fritz, when he decided to invest in the brewery and eventually buy the entire thing, he saved a little brewery out here, but he also saved a style of beer. And in so doing, I should describe a little bit about what steam beer is and what makes it so unique. Is it's a lager brewed with a nice helping of caramel malt to make it a nice amber lager. But the unique thing about how it's fermented is that it's fermented at a warmer temperature. We started about 60 degrees, and then it's allowed to kind of free rise ferment in an open fermenter. And so we ferment open with no back pressure on the fermenter, and a shallow pan fermenter that has no cooling jacket on it. And so it's got a very warm and quick fermentation, and therefore produces a nice estery, fruity, delicious beer, which is a lager beer, but it kind of drinks like an ale. So it's very unique in its style and in the way it's made. And when Fritz decided that he was going to, go into the brewing business and buy this brewery, he made it his duty to save this style of beer and to reintroduce first San Francisco and then the world to a unique style of beer, and that really launched so much more in what we see in craft brewing and in all of brewing today.
Well, it seems to me that it was a little ahead of its time. Cool ships back in that day, I had never even heard of that until researching this piece. I assume that they're no longer on the roof.
No, we don't. And in fact, we no longer really cool in cool ships. We ferment in open fermentation, but we use heat exchangers to cool the wort. But the miraculous thing about it is the open fermentation and how unique that is. And no, it's not on the roof. It's in a nice closed room where we can keep it good and clean.
And the no back pressure is specific to the yeast reaction, isn't it? Or is there something else involved?
It's just simply that because of it being open, there's no pressure on the vessel whatsoever, and so the yeast ferments, in a very natural way. But also, our particular yeast strain in this shallow pan fermenter produces a very estery beer.
Another interesting aspect, and I get this from the history of the brewery, but I'm really inclined as to what the impact of the copper brewhouse really has on, or had on, the original recipes, and if it's even still in use today.
Yes, it is. We are using a solid all copper brewhouse built in Germany in the 1950s. It's a beautiful antique brewhouse, if you will, that's still in very good working order. And the all copper, there is a little bit of flavor that copper imparts, and all brewers like to use a little bit of copper. Even in all stainless steel brew houses, they will often have a piece of sacrificial copper that is emitting some copper into the wort because it's a necessary mineral nutrient for the yeast. Copper does good things for the yeast, so you got to have some. But the advantages and disadvantages of copper are many. There's a reason they don't build a lot of copper brew houses today. It's expensive. It wears easily. You can't use chemicals to clean it. It's difficult to work with in comparison to stainless steel. But the pros, it's beautiful. And it's got great heat transfer properties, and it works quite well. There's a reason copper was chosen to build all the brew houses for hundreds of years, but it's definitely fallen out of favor in recent times. We love our all copper brew house and treat it with care and kindness and try to keep it alive. It's been making beer for us for many years, 40 years in this brewery, and as I said, it was built in the 50s, so it's got more history than that.
That seems like it's got to be a labor of love, but my question would be, do you use a separate system, and if so, what is it for piloting new beers?
Oh yeah, we did. This is our one and only brew house. We do have a little 7-barrel pilot brew house across the street that's more of a modern built, all stainless steel type thing. But yeah, all the commercially available Anchor beer that you have anywhere outside of our tap room here is all produced in this beautiful all copper brew house.
And I love that it goes back to the original, and the original concept, and correct me if I'm wrong, is steam really, this beer particular, is this the beginning of what is now referred to as California Common in terms of style?
Yeah, so it was called steam beer, and Fritz Maytag actually trademarked the name steam beer, and so because Anchor was the only brewery brewing steam beer, Fritz trademarked Anchor Steam, and he also trademarked steam beer. So anybody else making this style of beer has to call it California Common.
That's a nice distinction to have, and it's really at the base of what the persona outside of brewing circles is for this particular brewery. But for someone like me who came into contact with it 2 decades ago, stalwarts like Liberty and the Christmas beer are ones that really intrigue me more as early onset of American beer that I think really has stood the test of time. And how are they today to continue brewing recipes from 2 decades ago?
Yeah, Christmas Ale. Well, let me talk about Liberty Ale first. They both came out the same year, 1975, and Fritz was a historian, and was in 1975 was very excited about the coming of the bicentennial, and wanted to make a historical beer, a nod to he saw that Paul Revere's ride, the original the British Are Coming ride in 1775, happened on April 18th, and Fritz was brewing his new beer on April 18th, 1975, and making a British style of beer that had really fallen off the planet. And I talked about the fact that when he bought this brewery, and he, the American brewing scene in the 70s was pretty dim, and the reason is that, as I described, through the 40s, 50s, 60s, the big breweries got bigger, and they really were all making a very similar style of beer. There were many beers to choose from, but most of them were pale lagers. And Fritz bought a brewery that made an amber lager that was quite different. And then when he went to innovate, his first innovation was actually the porter, which is a fabulous beer, and an old British style. And our lineage in this brewery is German, and Fritz's lineage is actually German too. But Fritz was very interested in English styles, British styles of beer. And so when he went to make a porter, he researched. He went to England and Ireland and tasted many stouts and porters, and came back very almost disappointed that he couldn't find anything that he really wanted to sink his teeth into there, and decided to make his own, and made a very American style of porter using American malts and American hops, and essentially invented the American porter when he made Anchor Porter in the early 70s. And then in 1975, when he wanted to make another new beer, and Liberty Ale came into his mind, the other thing he had heard about and researched about, and it was something he could only find in books, was this concept of dry hopping, which was something that had completely fallen by the wayside, and hadn't been done really the way that he was seeking to do it. It hadn't really ever been done. So he essentially reinvented dry hopping to make Liberty Ale, and invented a technique that we still use today, and a recipe that we still use today with 2-row American barley and cascade hops, and hops plentifully added in the brew kettle, and then also dry hopped in the secondary fermentation, and that really, when you look at Liberty Ale and where it sits in the pantheon of American beers and international beers, every IPA that follows, every hoppy pale ale that follows, they all owe their lineage to Liberty Ale. This is where it all started, right here in San Francisco, with Fritz Maytag reading about something and then saying, "God damn it, I'm going to make it." And he made this beautiful beer, and we still make it today. And so Liberty Ale is really, to me, almost more historically significant than Steam, from where it sits, and how much it changed American brewing landscape. And it happened at a time right around when, Jimmy Carter came in and wanted his brother Billy to be able to homebrew, and homebrewing was no longer a crime. And so people started making beer at home, and hop industry got behind some new hop varieties, and hops became something that came into the forefront. And once again, everybody was zigging, and Fritz zagged. He made the hoppiest beer in America, the hoppiest beer in the world, when he made Liberty Ale at that time. And Christmas Ale followed shortly thereafter, and Christmas Ale, comes with the promise of a new tree on the label and a new recipe every year, and we get really excited about it, formulating it and making it something that's very special and unique. Excited about Christmas Ale right now because we actually bottled some today, and this is the time of year when we really start cranking on Christmas Ale.
Next time we'll have to do this interview in person so we can sample my favorite beer from this brewery.
Yeah,
forever.
I have a bottle of Christmas Ale sitting right here in front of me that looks like we should be busting it open and tasting it. So.
And I love the concept that it changes every year, but yet I come back to it over and over. and still taste some common threads going through it. Is that just my perception, like an old friend, or are there some things that do come back year after year?
That's real. The starting point is always last year's recipe. So we start with that. And we decide, we're going to add this, we're going to take that out. We brew some prototypes and make some decisions along the way. But yes, the starting point is always last year's recipe. And there are certain things that remain the same, like the fermentation profile, the yeast, the fermentation temperature, we messed around a little bit. You may have noticed an escalation in alcohol over the last 4 years, but we kind of settled at 6.9, same this year as last year, but we ramped it up. It was 5.5 for years, and we just decided, I think it was 4 years ago now, that this beer, a lot of people age this beer, and our belief was that it would age better at a slightly higher alcohol, and that belief is holding up as we evaluate those beers as they age. They do age nicely.
I will completely agree, but it does bring me back to a couple of questions about, like you said, Liberty being nearly a smash recipe, and this evolution of Christmas. For a person with your background that came from Anheuser-Busch, back to the craft industry, my questions would go towards how has that changed in terms of vendors, maltsters in particular? Are you partial to, I believe, Admiral's in town, or do you have specifics that have helped evolve Christmas or anything else?
Yeah, I can tell you, just speaking about it from my own personal background, I grew up in the Bay Area. This brewery, for me, I collected Christmas ale bottles as a kid that my dad drank, and carted them around with me for the 18 years that I was with Anheuser-Busch, and this brewery's always had a special place in my heart. And Christmas ale, above all others, was the part of it that I was so excited about when I first came here to get involved in that, and be able to address it. And yeah, as we evaluate different raw materials, we are very excited to have Admiral Malting here in the Bay Area. We are actually using their malts, have used their malts to create a couple of, you mentioned Smash, a couple of Smash brews across the street at our pilot brewery. We did an Admiral Nelson and Admirals of the Galaxy and a couple other fun Admiral things. And then we've also purchased some Admiral malting to go into our Baykeeper IPA, because we felt like it was like, here's a brew we're making for the Bay, and boy, there's a malt house right on the other side of the Bay from us, so we got to get these guys included in this, and they've been great that way. So yeah, Ron and those guys they're our friends, and we're using their malt, and it's great stuff. Not in Christmas ale yet, though. And in Christmas ale, some of the spices we've locally sourced in the past, and we've done some things where, because it's a secret recipe, I can't tell you all the details, but it is fun to get those sort of things involved.
Well, and as we look at what was 4 beers for the longest time, right, and now the portfolio seems to have really exploded the last 4 or 5 years, and I'm interested in how you go about, do you formulate from all these new hop varietals? Do you go through hop selection? It is September as we're speaking, so I don't know if you've been to Yakima or anywhere else.
Yeah, I've been up to Yakima, not so much for hop selection. Hop selection is a very difficult thing. We have them send us samples, and we brew with them. Hop selection, standing in a room full of hops and rubbing hops all day, you get sensory overload so quick that it's more about just having a good time up in Yakima. And I do love going up there. We've gone up there for various other things, and we've sent some brewers. We actually just had a couple brewers up there a couple weeks ago. One of the hop suppliers puts on a really great hop educational, like a 3-day thing where they take you through harvest and take you through the pellet plant and show you all the wonders of the hop industry. So very involved with the suppliers, but for evaluating, to me, the two best ways to evaluate hops from a brewing potential, one is to make a hop tea, but the other most critical one is to actually brew with it, make a beer. And so that's the purpose of having a pilot brewery and being able to do those things, and do them and make a commercially viable size. A 7-barrel Brewhouse can give you 35 to 40 small kegs of beer that you can then taste and sell across the bar and get feedback and get input. And that's the best way to develop recipes.
And you have developed, since your tenure began, quite a number of new offerings. Has that been the process for all of them?
Well, unfortunately not. We didn't get the pilot brewery until late 2017. So up until then, we were grasping around in the dark quite a bit. We had a little not 5-barrel, but not 5-gallon, but a 10-gallon Sabco brew house that we have under our brew house here. That basically it's like a glorified homebrew kit. Really good for developing, say, Christmas ale recipes when you already know what you're going to do, but just not really good for developing a new IPA or anything like that. I mean, the fermentation, the dry hopping, like all of those things are just super difficult on that scale, and it's much better to do something a little bigger and make enough to where, like I said, if you could sell it in your tap room and have, there's no better way to evaluate a beer than running out of beer and having people come in and ask for it. Where's that one? I love that one. And then you had something.
So that said, when we look ahead to the future for what is the oldest brewery in California, where are you going from here? What does the future look like for Anchor?
The future right now, what I can see that, it's still, for us, it comes back to steam. Our flagship brand is very, very important to us. It's over half of our volume. It's our bread and butter, and it's still an underrepresented style and a great everyday drinking beer, right? So for us, it's really important to get steam out there in front of more people. And part of that is putting it in cans. People are crazy about cans these days, more than ever. And so we put steam in the big 19.2 ounce cans for single serve, last year for the first time. And that's been doing really well. And you're going to see, 12 ounce cans coming on the market next year. So part of that future is steam, right? And then another part of that future is continuing to evolve, bring out new things. The tap room experience is really important for us. So having more beers available in the tap room, continuing to investigate, kind of what do people look for from us? And I think that's really important. I don't think you're going to see a sparkling water come out from us anytime soon, because that's just not who we are, right? We know everybody's jumping on that bandwagon, but that's not the one for us. And you got to have that restraint to say, yeah, maybe this would be a fun thing to do in the tap room, but I don't think this is really, the next big thing from Anchor is not going to be Anchor spiked. We are a brewery that makes beers for drinking, beers that are balanced and drinkable. We rely on Christmas ale as a big part of our yearly thing, so we're going to keep focused on that. And we need to stay focused on what people expect from us. Will there be new IPAs? Yes. Will there be other twists and turns that come? Sure, there will. But it all starts with steam and a solid foundation of having the other thing that we have seen over the last couple of years is our variety pack is now our second biggest brand if you took it all by itself. So continuing to have a variety pack, continuing to be out there for sampler packs for people to be able to taste steam and taste some of the other offerings, reintroduce them to Liberty Ale, and bringing that back in a can starting next year is also something that I'm pretty excited about.
Well, the non-spiked aspect, I think, is music to my ears. And I want to ask you, takes me where I'm going. My personal favorite, Foghorn's unique and a style that is not produced like it used to be. How do you feel about it itself and barley wine in general?
Barley wines are a beautiful thing, but it's an occasional, or there are certain drinkers I know two or three. I have two or three friends who will come here and it'll be the first thing that they go for, even on a hot day like today. I have a buddy who's I'm just going to have one beer. Well, I'm going to have a barley wine, goddammit. And that's okay. If that's your jam, you go for it. But it is an underappreciated style, a 10% all malt, very thick beer. We don't sell a whole heck of a lot of it, but it's still an important style. We've also barrel aged some of it, and the barrel aged Foghorn is exquisite, really, really delicious. Those sort of things are fun.
Well, I look forward to getting my hands on some of that, and I really appreciate the time that you had to spend with me today.
Folks, make sure that you follow up on the show notes, and if you're in the area, get out to Anchor itself and look for the new can line. Scott, thank you for all your time.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for having me. And yeah, seriously, anybody who's listening, if you ever come to San Francisco, this brewery is definitely worth a visit. It's a magical place, and in a beautiful historic building in a kind of a quiet part of town. And now we have a bar across the street where you can stay and drink more beer after the tour.
Scott, I really want to say thanks for taking all the time and spending it with me today. Great conversation. I'm really interested, even more so than I was before, in what Anchor's doing and where it's going in the future.
And I didn't even bring up that the Raiders are playing the Chiefs this weekend. I did see you're a Chiefs fan, so.
And I am looking forward to that, as well as all the games against the Raiders, whether they're in your town or Las Vegas. Well, that's it for us this week, folks. Hope you enjoyed this. Let us know what you think in the comments. Reach out to Scott at Anchor. If you're in town, check that out as well. Thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you next time.